Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Broderick here. Just want to share a brief message before our episode with Issa Gucciardi. Lovely conversation, by the way. I want to apologize to you all for not releasing an episode last week. You all know that I try to release every week, but last week it didn't work out. I intended to release a solo episode and I worked on it and I wasn't satisfied with it and I just ran out of time. And so I decided not to release an episode last week. A heads up for the future, I will be releasing solo episodes where I dig into some particular aspect of this greater question of what does it mean to live well? What is a life worthy of living, etc. And when I can't do an episode, I will likely do a replay as well. So again, my apologies for that. Those of you who were looking for an episode last week, I will try to stay on top of things as best I can and do better next time. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Issa. I really enjoyed this conversation. And if you are enjoying the show, please share with your friends and family and let people know what we're doing here on the podcast, trying to encourage conversations centered around the question of a life worthy of living, the good life. And if you're getting any benefit out of this, please share with friends and family, and let's grow this community of people interested in exploring these ideas. All right, enjoy the conversation with Issa. Take care.
I think living a life of service to something greater than oneself, at least for me, that's that. I'm fairly dedicated to the evolution of consciousness and willing to do a lot to help people try to find their way toward a greater state of awareness.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Today, our guest is Issa Gucciardi. Issa is the founding director of the Foundation of the Sacred Stream, a nonprofit organization and school for consciousness studies in Berkeley, California. She lectures nationally and internationally and is on the faculty of Embodied Philosophy, Minla Tibet House, and Onaya, and is a regular guest lecturer at UC Berkeley. Issa holds degrees in cultural and linguistic anthropology, comparative religion, and transpersonal psychology. She is the creator of Death Hypnosis, a groundbreaking therapeutic model that blends elements of ancient wisdom and contemporary psychological thought. It has won rave reviews from psychotherapeutic and spiritual counselors alike. She is also the author of 3 books: Coming to Peace, The New Return to the Great Mother, and the forthcoming Death Hypnosis. Hi, Issa. How are you?
I'm good. Actually, the depth hypnosis book is here. It is no longer forthcoming.
Oh, that is right.
So that's exciting. Yeah, we just published it, and actually, it was very exciting because we published it on January 14th on Amazon, or it went up on Amazon on January 14th of this year, and on January 17th, it was #1 in spirituality and self-help. So that was pretty exciting.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
called a depth hypnosis, a path to healing, transformation, and power.
Yeah. Well, also, since you talked about it already right now, mentioning it, can you just say a little bit more about depth hypnosis and what the book is about, and then we can go into the rest of the conversation.
Sure. Well, actually, depth hypnosis it's depth with a P. It sounds like death hypnosis, but it's depth hypnosis. Is a spiritual counseling model that I've developed over the course of many decades of clinical work. And you were, one of the things I know, Broderick, for you is to understand, what is living well for someone. What is, what are your values and how do you feel you're living well? And I feel in writing this book, I'm doing something positive. I feel like in all the years I've spent in the clinical setting and in training people how to become depth hypnosis practitioners, I feel that my values of really emphasizing the possibility of healing and really trying to help people heal from issues that they thought they might not be able to heal from is really embodied in this book. And so, um, so that's a little bit about the book. It talks about the different aspects of ancient wisdom that do contribute to the book, including earth-based wisdom and shamanism and Buddhist psychology, as well as hypnotherapy, transpersonal psychology, and energy medicine. And there's quite a few case studies in the book that really demonstrate the possibility of healing from things like addiction, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and spiritual emergencies, especially spiritual emergencies that come out of plant medicine encounters, which are becoming more and more common and need more and more specific focus of healing modality. Um, and each of those wisdom systems has a strong, powerful set of values within them that are part of where I focus, which is, to stay close to the earth, stay close to goodness, stay close to the self, recognizing that the self is essentially good, and that the issues or the symptoms that we have, that where we come for help, for healing, are ways in which we have somehow gotten disconnected from that essential goodness. And so that's a reflection of my own personal values that are reflected within the model of depth hypnosis and that are elucidated in the book.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I am sure a lot of those ideas are going to come out in our conversation today about living well, as you already kind of hinted to there. You've already mentioned a little bit more about yourself. I read your bio, but is there anything else you would like to say about yourself in general before I ask the question of what living well means to you?
Um, 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 I'm here.
I know, right?
I'm doing my best to stay present. Um, I'm like so many people, trying to become more conscious, trying to become more aware, trying to help people become more conscious and become more aware so that less harm is done in the world.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Let's see how all of that comes out in this conversation. Really looking forward
Mm-hmm.
to the rest of it. So, what does living well mean to you? What is a life worthy of living? The good life. I use those audience. I use those questions interchangeably because I think they're all interrelated. So what does what does that mean to you?
I think living a life of service to something greater than oneself, at least for me, I'm fairly dedicated to the evolution of consciousness, and willing to do a lot to help people try to find their way toward a greater state of awareness. And I think healing is really important. And I think living well incorporates, and it must include the, I mean, for me, it must include, I'm not trying to impose it on anyone else, but must include the effort to heal, the effort to understand oneself, and the effort to become as, as generous and as um, willing to offer what is needed in any given moment.
Hmm. Beautiful, beautiful. I love how you start that off with service and recognizing that you live in a community of others and having care for those others, and how that is, using when someone mentions something first that suggests it is extremely important to them. Can you say a little bit more about the importance of service and why serving someone else is going to make my life better,
Mm.
make my life good rather?
Well, as the Dalai Lama says, when you develop compassion, the first person you serve is yourself, right? So I teach a class called The Path of Service. And I also teach a class called The Psychology of the Bodhisattva. And a bodhisattva in Buddhism is someone who is following the path of service and helping other beings evolve and attain a greater state of stability. So I'm very focused on the idea of service. And, you know, the thing that I see about service and helping people understand what is the nature of their own path to service is that when you begin to think about another person, you have to think about your own well-being first, because you can't serve from a place of wholeness or a place where that is agenda free unless you understand your own motivations to be of service. And in order to understand your motivation to be of service, you have to understand yourself at a deeper level. So you are immediately served in that inquiry as you as you sort of step onto the path of service to see what it is to help others. Because you can't effectively help other people if you don't know, and you can't effectively help other people heal if you don't know what it is for yourself and what it is that you need in order to heal.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. So we do get that benefit personally from engaging or embarking on this path of service to others. In order for us to serve well, we need to take care of ourselves and make sure that we are in the condition to do that job well and giving to others. No, that's beautiful. And I can see also how healing and becoming more conscious is related to that. Um,
Exactly. I mean, that you have a lot of different spiritual traditions that emphasize service as a path of spiritual evolution.
mhm. Yeah, and I'm in a yogic tradition, and karma yoga is such a big piece of the puzzle there.
Right, right,
Yeah, essentially, it's healing through action, but usually that action is bound to tie to others in some capacity.
right.
Yeah. Can you say a little more about, you say, becoming more conscious? What does that mean to become more conscious?
To become more conscious means to become aware of yourself, to become aware of what is motivating you. Um, I think a lot of people spend, especially these days, with the huge rise in social media engagement and this, all of this media that distracts people into looking at things outside of themselves is very, very distracting, and a lot of people engage with social media and other forms of distractions in an effort not to know themselves, in an effort not to understand some aspect of themselves that might be difficult and that they don't know how to deal with. And this is why you have so many people engaging in addictions, especially like all the kinds of addictions that arise online, right? And it's so easy to engage in addictions online. We're not even talking about substances, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about addictions of the mind. And so I think that becoming conscious is being willing to put down distractions, put down anything that would take you away from yourself, and sit with yourself and become and get to know yourself, make friends with yourself. There's I'm sure in the yogic tradition that there are meditations that are very similar to the Buddhist tradition, where you're just watching your breath and bringing your attention to different parts of your body. And that's the meditation, and just sitting with that, just sitting with yourself and becoming aware of, you know, the way that your little pinky feels and the way that your nose feels, and just being with yourself is something that is a first step toward awareness. And as you become more aware, you become more conscious of what it is that you need to address within yourself in order to be able to settle, in order to be able to be fully present, in order not to need distractions, and in order to be able to be present enough to be aware of another person and their own and the other person's own needs and desires.
Mm. I love how you're, because I'm quite familiar with, the yogic world, the Buddhist world, and I love how you're talking about this in a very practical way. Being aware of yourself, ultimately being aware of how you ultimately end up choosing to take actions, being aware of others. Because I know this concept of awareness can go quite deep.
Yeah.
And can you say a little bit more, about the depths of awareness? Because I know, as a Buddhist practitioner, I'm sure you, this is such an important part of the training and teaching. But I love how you talk about it from a practical perspective first, because sometimes that gets left out. Um, so.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that arises in this fast-paced world is that people want to fast track to enlightenment. They want a fast track to consciousness. What's gonna make them see the light quickest. And and one of the things that you see is that people, like, they're chasing the light. And just doing practices that might bypass the very important work of being able to be with oneself as one is, and then to understand what one needs to heal in order to be able to hold awareness or hold consciousness at a deeper level. And I was teaching at the San Francisco Dharma Collective the other night, and one of the things that one of the issues that came up was um, this idea that you know someone was having an issue because they had this dream where they had killed someone who was trying to kill them and all the people they were with, and they all she could do was think about what a bad Buddhist practitioner she was. And the thing that when I looked at that dream, what I saw was that she needed to be able to put down a proper boundary to negativity in order to be able to feel safe and to feel whole. And so, in order to be able to hold a more enlightened state, and she was kind of pushing herself beyond her own well being, thinking that she had to let go of her well being in order to be able to be the light or see the light, that she had to let go of the self. And what I said to her, I'll say here again, which is you cannot go beyond the self without healing the self. You cannot let go of the self without healing the self. And I think that people don't understand this in a lot of Dharma or yogic communities. They think all they have to do is study the nature of consciousness and then try to align with the values. And of course that's going to help. Of course that will really help, and it will act as a potential vehicle toward more enlightened state. But if you don't have a basic fundamental understanding of who you are and where your own vulnerabilities and woundings are, and how you can address those vulnerabilities and woundings in a way to make yourself more whole, you're not going to be able to deeply hold any teachings around consciousness um, uh, in a balanced way.
Hmm. I love this because I see it quite often. I'm sure you have too, and in various circles where people want to jump into no self. I'm
Right.
like, hold on,
Right.
time out.
Yeah.
I've actually seen someone have a psychotic break doing that.
It's not uncommon. It's not uncommon. And that's why depth hypnosis is so important, because it takes, with depth hypnosis, when whatever the issue is, and if it's a spiritual emergency like that, where you're chasing the light, and then because you haven't done the healing, when you run into a higher frequency of vibratory experience, you shatter. And that's what happens. That's what's happening when people have that spiritual emergency, in that effort to let go of the self. But depth hypnosis is an antidote to that, because we sit down and we say, we ask these questions from the very beginning, like, what was the nature of your birth? What was your relationship with the universe or the divine when you were little? What was your relationship like with each of your siblings and your parents, or the fact that you didn't have siblings or parents, when you were very young? And then we ask those same questions moving through a person's life. And at each moment, people have to try to understand the arc of their emotional experience. And then through that inquiry, much can be laid bare. A lot of times people forget that their past is part of their present. And we've all had some kind of difficulty growing up, especially these days. There's so much chaos and so much pressure on parents to try to parent well, that and not every parent is able to meet the standard that they would like to meet in doing that, in parenting. And so, or maybe they don't have any standards, and the children are kind of left in the gap. So helping someone understand their experience, and helping them understand how they may have been exposed to trauma in ways that they don't recognize. I think that's a really common thing, that we're so inured to the experience of trauma that people don't even know they've been traumatized. And they just know they don't feel good. They just know that they have to engage in certain habits or certain behaviors, or they don't feel good. And it's like slowing it all down, helping people understand, okay, so it really was traumatic when you got hit by your father. Yes, that actually was a trauma. That isn't good child rearing practice, as the cultural norm would say. And so, helping them actually be present with that, and with that trauma. And in depth hypnosis, there's a very important aspect of the work, which is about at the very beginning of the process, where people are helped to connect with what we call a part of themselves that has only their highest good as its sole intent. And this part of the self may be perceived as in any form that has meaning for that person. It could be an animal, or a light, or a plant. And that part of the self becomes one of the most important relationships in the therapeutic setting, that is there supporting and protecting the person as they go into these issues that they may have not had the courage or help to go into, or even know that they need to go into. And so depth hypnosis, helps you as you encounter this part of the self by altering your state of awareness through through suggestions for relaxation, through hypnosis. And then once we've identified some of the symptoms that the person is dealing with, then with that part of the self, as a sort of a protector, we again, in the altered state of awareness, track the experience of the symptoms back through time, through regression work, and help people discover the places where the trauma occurred, and change their relationship to it through the processes of depth hypnosis, which changes their experience of the symptoms that they come to for help with.
Really beautiful, Isa. It's what I'm hearing is that through this healing process, you're helping stabilize the self.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely true. Right.
Having a stable sense of self before jumping into this idea of no self. I just think it's funny, but I won't go too far into that, because
Yeah.
it's not funny, because I think there's a lot of people. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a big misunderstanding that people have. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And having a stable sense of self is important, even if it is a relative self, even from a perspective that this idea of self is not really a thing in and of itself. But it is an important aspect of being a human being, and to just pretend that it doesn't exist is going to lead to all kinds of problems for people as we see this.
Yeah, we need to make friends with ourselves,
Yeah.
We need to learn about ourselves. We need to know what our deepest self's desires are.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess that's a form of awakening. I think
Yes, that's
some
right.
when there's there levels of awakening. I think the first awaken to just being a person, this idea of a self. Who is this Broderick, and what's this idea of Broderick, and why does Broderick do these things? That's
Right.
important too. That's a very important thing
Very
versus
important.
oh, there's no such thing as Broderick, and I can go
Yeah.
around acting like I'm enlightened and thinking I have this deep awareness, but I haven't even awakened to who I am as a person, and sometimes I can bypass that and go out and behave in all kinds of crazy ways and saying that I'm enlightened or saying that I'm awakened to this deep awareness of who I am that's deeper than there's no self, there's no such thing as Broderick, but I'm walking around like an asshole, traumatizing everybody else.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I'm laughing because you use the word asshole and calling yourself an asshole, but it's not funny. I totally, that is what happens. People act poorly toward other people because they don't know themselves. You're
mhm.
absolutely right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, no, it's fine. No, we're playing here. I was
Yeah.
therefore we're playing. It's okay. Where I'm from, people talk all over each other, and it's fine.
But I
um,
remember I was teaching with this Zen teacher, and um, they said this thing. It was like on this panel, and they said this thing. They said people were talking about, someone was talking about something difficult that had happened with them as part of the Dharma question and answer. And the teacher said, I'm not interested in the story. And I'm like, you're not interested in the story? The story is everything.
I
A
know.
person's story is everything. And if you're not interested in the story, where do you start? You know?
Yes. Oh, thank you, Isa. So hear this, audience. That's really important. This is a Buddhist teacher now.
Yes.
No self doctrine, but
Yeah.
still acknowledges like, no, this we live by a story. This whole thing came out around spiritual bypassing, or I liked it. I mean, I think it's awakening bypassing, whatever, where people try to disregard the story, but they're still living by that story unconsciously,
Right. Right.
causing harm to their environment, their community, because they're denying the very narrative that they're living by. You can't just pretend that it doesn't exist, because it's impacting others. It's impacting your life, but it's also impacting the lives of others because you're making choices from this narrative, from this story that you have. And when you pretend that it doesn't exist or you refuse to try to clarify and make sense of that story, then you inevitably, especially when you haven't done the healing work that you're speaking of, because a lot of times we act in the world from our subconscious conditioning. These well, in
Right.
yoga we talk
Right.
about latent samskaras, those imprints that's been made in our earlier experiences, and that shapes our current narrative, and just completely bypass it and not attend to. I'm not saying get stuck there, but to completely bypass it and not attend to it. Those habits of mind that we're unconscious of are dictating our actions, and those actions oftentimes causes harm to ourselves and others. So I love that you're talking about this and bringing this in, because
I
this
mean,
is so important.
I think that we do need to understand our story, and we need to go beyond our story. I mean, I get what the
Mm,
teacher was saying. You need to get beyond your story, but you
sure.
can't get beyond your story until you know it.
Exactly.
And And also you have to, you have to also be aware enough to see if you're addicted to your story. So again, I could see why they would say, you should get beyond your story, especially if you're addicted to it, saying it over and over and over again, like creating
Mm-hmm.
deeper and deeper sanskaras. Like, I get it. I mean, on one level I understand what they were talking about, but you know I think that there are different levels of practice. And
Yes.
in terms of that, that practice of, going beyond the self, or, stepping into an awareness of larger consciousness, I think that's very, very important work, and very deep work. And it's work that I teach in all the classes that I teach, the implied Buddhist psychology, where we're moving into understanding the nature of the enlightened mind, and advanced depth hypnosis, where we're looking at understanding what it is to be completely aligned with your higher self. Like there is a place where you can step into that greater awareness and let the story drop. But you have to go through the story. You can't go around the story.
Beautiful. Yeah, I like that. I always say, awakening, there are levels to it, of course. Even when you awaken beyond that story, even when you come to this realization that, oh, I'm not my narrative, you're still going to live by that story, though. You can walk around and pretend that that story is not impacting you. So, yeah, you can work on healing, you stabilize yourself. But I think what's even more important is once you awaken to that awareness, this realization that you are beyond that, and you is not just confined to the surface of your skin, well, within the surface of your skin, and in your own narrative and story. But how do you take that realization and apply it to creating a narrative and a story that's going to allow you to behave and act in the world from that place for that deeper awareness? That's the way I look at it, at least.
Yeah, well, that's what healing is. How do you take it? What do you do? That's what healing is. Healing is transforming anything within you that is obscuring your, in Buddhist terms, your Buddha nature from you, or
Mm-hmm.
from a depth hypnosis point of view, anything that's obscuring your higher self from you. And that you understand that the path to healing and the path toward wholeness is a path toward connecting with that which is best and good within you, and doing whatever you need to do to remove the obstacles to be able to make that connection. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, for most of us, we have obstacles to that connection that generally involve some kind of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And that trauma does need to be healed in order for the connection to be reestablished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so, what do you think about this? Also, that so once you heal, you remove the obstacles to the best of our abilities. I don't know if you can 100% remove all of them, but there's a process of removing more and more of those obstacles. And what about once you've removed all those obstacles and you're moving through the world from your Buddha nature, from your higher self? Because I believe that we still need to mold a narrative that reflects that. So how do I now say, okay, then now I want to take control of my narrative. I want to help uh, create better habits of mine that are in line with what I perceive to be my higher nature. So that means like cultivating. I know in the Buddhist tradition they have this, but I just want to see what your thoughts are. Cultivating things like kindness and compassion and all these
Sure.
different qualities.
Yeah, I talk about going in the front door and going in the back door in terms of moving toward greater awareness or greater healing in depth hypnosis. So in depth hypnosis, going in the front door is going through the symptoms, going through the obstacles that are causing problems. Like if you're having anxiety attacks, or if you're having like you can't quit smoking pot, or if you have an eating disorder that's really affecting your health, or if you have a depression that just won't give. You do have to go through that in the front door. Like we tackle that, and we kind of make inquiry into that. And that's one way of breaking up the obstacles that are causing the disconnection from the self. But then there's also going in the back door, which is that process of connecting with that part of the self that has only your highest good as its sole intent. And that part of that in Buddhist practice, which is cultivating the awakened mind, under like doing compassion exercises and doing meditations focused on equanimity, and doing meditations focused on loving kindness, and meditations focusing on empathetic joy. That's going in the back door. So you're illuminating that part of the self that is connected, still connected, and you're feeding it through, connected to the higher self, or the Buddha nature, or the sense of wholeness, and you're feeding that part of the self with the devotional practices, with mantra meditation, with deity meditation, with practicing with the sangha, like, or spending time understanding your own higher self in meditation. So that's going in the back door. So you're illuminating all of the potentials with the spiritual practice, and then you're using something like depth hypnosis to go in and break up the obstacles in the front door, because those are the ones we're usually aware of. More aware of the obstacles generally than we are aware of the part of ourselves that is connected in an unbroken way to our essential wholeness.
Mm. Yeah, it's a very holistic practice.
Yes.
Now it's holistic, and we can acknowledge this. I can acknowledge Broderick, and I can go beyond Broderick and try to illuminate the aspect of me, on my Buddha nature or my higher self in the world through cultivating these various practices, cultivating these qualities, so they can be illuminated in the new Broderick, the Broderick that comes out into the world. Yeah, I love this. I
Yeah.
love it. Hmm. So you talked about service, talked about becoming more aware, increasing your consciousness, and you talked about healing. Is there any more you want to say about any of those? Because I have another question I want to ask you. But
No,
any?
go ahead. Go with your question. Yeah.
So, what role does liberation? What does liberation mean to you? This idea of being free from suffering, or liberating ourselves from suffering. How does that play into all of this?
Well, in the process of healing, you're liberating yourself from that which makes you suffer, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned this concept of the bodhisattva, and in and definitely depth hypnosis is part of this path of the bodhisattva. Um, to just like talk for a moment about from a Buddhist perspective, because it's a Buddhist concept. Um, in many forms of Buddhist practice, you have the goal of just attaining a certain level of enlightened awareness, which is a liberation from the cycles of suffering. And this is usually the Hinayana schools that you find in Southeast Asia and maybe southern India. But you see a lot of emphasis on just attaining that enlightened state, and then just resting there and just staying there. And in the Mahayana schools, they're like in northern India and in the Himalayas and parts of China, you see a different set of priorities. They're the same set of priorities up to a certain moment, to where you do the work of healing, you do the work of the devotional practices to help remove obstacles to your ability to perceive your own Buddha nature and to rest in it, and then to be able to be at ease with a more enlightened state. With the Mahayana schools, you don't stay in that enlightened place. You turn around and you come back into the cycle of suffering, the samsara, or the place of experience where people don't understand the consequences of their actions, and they're making decisions based on their aversions and their attachments, which are a function often of trauma from a depth hypnosis point of view. And then you help them, you dedicate your life to helping liberate other people so that they also attain that state of liberation. So that's that. So in terms of what is liberation, for me, the idea of liberation is to be able to be stable and solid and equanimous and you know, able to serve others and serve oneself without a lot of attachments or aversions. And also for me, for in particular, you know, just me, I'm not, and no one has to agree with me, but a lot of Mahayana Buddhists do, you would also then, part of the process of liberation is the liberate assisting to the best of your ability in the liberation of others. And whatever that is, in depth hypnosis, it's very clear it's a vehicle of liberation, because we're working with all of the things that make us cry, make us be afraid, make us, you know, have anxiety, make us feel, you know, kind of dead inside. We are in the front lines on that with depth hypnosis. And so it's very clear that we are in a process of liberation and helping liberate people from that suffering. And so I think liberation is not only for oneself, but it's also the process of doing whatever one can to help liberate another. And that may look completely different for someone else. Like a gardener may decide to plant a garden in a area which has, you know, that's underserved, that doesn't have plants and that doesn't have farms and doesn't have um, even flowers or something like that. They would just choose to plant a garden there and then, you know, offer the community the fruits of the garden. And you know, that is a process of helping liberate others from hunger, from the poverty with lack of beauty that lack of beauty creates. And you know, so and then, you know, a software developer may have their own method of, you know, finding a new way to deliver insulin for diabetics with you know, a program that they create, and that is liberating people in another kind of a way, right? So there's many ways to engage in service and to, you know, work toward one's own wholeness, and then dedicate that wonderful good fortune of finding whatever level of wholeness you found to helping other people find that level of wholeness. And I don't think you have to be completely enlightened to be able to engage in that path. You don't have to have it all figured out. I mean, I wouldn't, you know, I've been doing this for, you know, for several decades, and you know, I definitely don't have it all figured out. And if I had thought that I had to have it all figured out, 3 books wouldn't be written, a school of consciousness wouldn't have been established, thousands of people would not have been trained. You know, like we can all work on ourselves as we continue on our path
Yeah.
and helping others.
I love it. Oh, all of it. I loved all of that. You, you really touched on some important things there, because the liberation, first of all, is a process. And to
Yes.
be perfectly honest, I think enlightenment is overrated. I think enlightenment is a path, just like liberation is a path. Because if we want to wait until we're fully enlightened, some schools have thought like you don't really get there until you're dead anyway. Because
Maybe not when you're dead.
I know exactly.
Death doesn't help
I know, right?
necessarily.
You know, because we all have patterns of mind, and we keep liberating ourselves in this process, and once we liberate one aspect of ourselves, we come to see other aspects of ourselves that can be liberated further.
Right,
and,
right, right.
and
It's a constant state of self-discovery.
e-
Absolutely.
exactly, and as we continue to do that, instead of worrying about being enlightened, I wouldn't even worry about it. Concern ourselves with becoming much more awakened, much more aware, and then in the process of becoming more aware, become more and more liberated to the best of our abilities. And from that place, like you're saying, do some healing. I mean, well, healing is that process of liberation, but from that place, let's serve. Now, how do we illuminate that
Exactly. Be of
into the
service.
world?
Exactly.
And knowing that we're going to be fallible creatures in the process because we're not fully enlightened, but that doesn't stop us. Don't worry about being fully enlightened. It becomes a cop out for not doing anything.
Right.
Well, I'm not enlightened
I can
enough, so I can continue to be a jerk. No.
see.
How do we continue to work on ourselves and, like, you know what? Since I am on the path of enlightenment, I'm on the path of liberation, I'm on the path of awakening, then when inevitably when I do something that doesn't necessarily come from my higher self, then it may not be anything atrocious, but it might just be, getting an attitude with somebody for no reason, being kind of callous towards the person in the grocery store or something like that. When we do that, though, we can recognize, like, that was not my best self. What was that about? What did that come from? What
Right.
habit of mine came to the forefront? Oh, I'm not as enlightened as I thought I was. Oh, there's more room for me to awaken. There's more room for me to learn how to be free, because obviously I'm not completely liberated because I was just a jerk for no
Right.
reason.
And so you develop self-awareness through being a jerk, and that's part of the path, and that's wonderful, right?
And that tunes into I think anyway. In the beginning you're talking about compassion. Then
Right.
you feel like, oh, I have enough self awareness to be compassionate towards others, because
Or toward oneself.
towards myself for sure, starting with myself
Yeah.
first. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because I'm not perfect, I'm not fully enlightened. Therefore,
Yeah.
if I'm not, and I'm not because I'm special, but because I'm working really hard at it, then I can have compassion for others who are not at all, who are not even working on it. And I can be like, okay, then this person, before I, throw them to the pit of hell, let me at least, before I go and do all of that, let me step back and look and, like, okay, what's going on for them? What could be causing them to behave that way? I'm not perfect. I have things that contribute to me doing things that I don't necessarily like. Oh, I can have a better understanding of others. Doesn't mean I agree with them and I agree with what it is that they're doing. Of course not. But I can have a better understanding of what may have led them to behave that way. And maybe I can do something to help facilitate some form of healing. Like,
With permission,
with
right? If you have permission,
with
right?
permission.
Right.
But like you
Yeah.
said, though, like, so you're in a neighborhood and there is, it's all concrete and it's a poor neighborhood. There's no plants, no flowers. Well, and before I say, well, all these people in this neighborhood is just involved in crime and I don't want nothing to do with them. It may be a lot of crime in that community, but what if you do go and you say, okay, then during the day I'm going to go and plant this garden. I'm going to start a program and try to get the kids involved in planting a garden with flowers or whatever. Start a community garden. That's big. You're
That's huge.
contributing. You're giving something to someone in the community, and that may just be the visual of a beautiful flower or seeing plants growing in the community. That's all
Just
important.
reconnecting with the earth, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be perfect in order for us to do
No,
that, but we can
no.
still bring about this awareness, this consciousness, this sensitivity, even when none of us are perfect. We can all contribute to the goodness in the world, even when none of us has it all figured out.
Right. We can do our best moment to moment.
Yeah, that's all we got, really, right?
Yeah.
We can do our best, and I love how healing is such an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the more you heal, the more present you can be. Right. And the more present you can be, the more you can offer help. Right. So,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
that's super helpful in terms of walking the path of service.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you've had a Buddhist training, you've had, psychotherapy, therapeutic kind of training. Um, what are some other things that people can do to help facilitate uh, this deepening of awareness, or these various things, healing, these things that can help?
Well, I think we can expand on this concept of self compassion.
Mm,
Because one of the things that happens when people start becoming aware that maybe they've been doing things that have been harming themselves or other people, then they can often become self-critical, and then they feel like it's their fault. They've done things that are not forgivable, and they can get into a bad space if they look at the effect of their behavior and decide that it's not okay. And I think it's at that moment that you have to, immediately, with unconditional compassion, allow yourself to look at your situation. And so, because if you don't bring compassion to the process, then it's harder to look at the ways in which you may have harmed yourself or others without blame. So this is why we have that part of the self that has only the highest good as the sole intent always present in this process of self understanding and self discovery. Because whenever there's something that's arisen that is a function of uh, the way that we may have acted because we were traumatized and we were trying to manage the trauma without even knowing that we were traumatized. And so the effect could be harmful, like a person who has a drinking problem. They're just trying, often when you talk to people who are addicts, they're just trying to get away from something. They're trying to get away from feeling bad. And they don't even know the effect that it's having on others. And what I see so frequently is when people start, realizing that they have to take responsibility for their actions, then they think, oh, I have to take blame. But no, you don't. You're not taking blame. You're taking responsibility so that you can change it. If you didn't take responsibility, you can't change it. So responsibility is a wonderful thing, and if you hold it with yourself with compassion from a responsible place and work toward change, and you have the help of something like depth hypnosis, or the other book that I've written that is really helpful here is Coming to Peace, which is about bringing peace to parts of the self and conflict resolution with members of the community. And so, and that way, you can work toward a greater sense of calmness within yourself and identify any place within you that is lacking in receiving compassion, and really bring that compassion to those places so that it can continue to unfold and continue to understand that things can change and continue to be able to take accountability so that change can happen. So the process of compassion and self-compassion is really fundamental, and it is also, as you mentioned, very important to bring that set level of compassion to another person who's trying to heal as well. And yet with accountability, like, yes, you've done this thing. Yes, you've created this harm. Yes, this is the effect of that harm. And we can have compassion for you. And we can also see what needs to be done to help you step out of this way of being. There's like, it's not like, oh, we can just have compassion and you can keep doing what you're doing. No, it's like, like, again, that process of taking responsibility and making changes is easier when you have something like depth hypnosis to help you transform, again, places within you that are traumatized and unable to participate.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. Because yeah, it's all as you were saying, I'm like, wow, it's almost. I mean, it's possible to do something. You can have some form of transformation, but it's very difficult to do this without self compassion.
Right,
Because
exactly.
if you don't have self compassion, you're not going to look at yourself. Because you're going to be like, no, I don't want to attend to this aspect of myself because I just don't like this part of me.
Right, right, right.
So I'm gonna stymie my healing in the process. And
Exactly,
then
exactly.
when we do that, we can't serve. It's hard to serve because we can't bring our full self to the table because we can't contend with the shadow or the dark aspects of ourselves. I'm like,
Right,
well, if we don't work on, if we don't have that compassion, holding ourselves with tenderness and being at peace with ourselves to the best of our abilities and holding ourselves accountable for sure, then we're not going to, it's going to be very difficult to, well, we have less energy to offer
right.
towards service
Yes, yes,
when we don't do
exactly.
that. Yeah.
Yes, less energy. That's right.
Mm. I love your perspective on the good life. Essentially, is very similar to the ancient Greek perspective, and the good life is there's many ways of interpreting this word eudaimonia. One way I like to interpret it as acting from your divine nature,
Hmm.
and And another big piece of that is like, well, what does that mean? It is essentially cultivating moral excellence. It's really about how do I show up in the world with others. And if I'm serving others, if I'm giving to the best of myself to the world in service, I mean, that essentially translates to moral excellence. Because you don't want, serving. Well, sometimes we feel serving is also not doing harm to someone else, or
Right.
not engaging in
Yeah.
activities that create suffering for others. That's a form of service.
Right.
You
Absolutely.
because
You're serving the common good.
exactly, like
Yeah.
that's a form of service. And so, because we say it in layman's terms, oh, well, that's a disservice to this community when you do this. I'm like, well, if you do the other thing, well, it's actually service. It's actually a good thing that
Right.
I don't know, buy some product that's being produced in a situation that by slavery, for instance. Well, I don't want to buy that product. I don't want to do that because I do this disservice to that community by doing that. So, but not buying that product is an act of service because I have those other people in mind. I don't want to contribute to their suffering or their harm. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, it's such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your perspectives, and thank you so much for inviting me to talk about some of mine. I really, it's I think it's important that we keep these questions on the table. What is a moral life? What is an ethical life? What are our core values? Thank you for doing that.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for bringing yourself and sharing your wisdom. And I'm all excited because of the things that you're speaking of, and about the self and healing. As even as a Buddhist practitioner, I love it. That sometimes that can just get completely bypassed, and it's really great for the audience to hear that from your perspective.
Well, if you want to learn more about depth hypnosis, or any of the concepts that we've been talking about here today, you can go to sacredstream.org, and there's a large library there. There's a lot of YouTube videos and lots of articles, and we have a podcast, Sacred Stream podcast, as well. And so there's a lot of resources for people to begin to um, you know understand better about who they are, and what their values are, and how they can live more fully from their own values.
Mhm.
So sacredstream.org is a helpful place to take a look at.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Please, audience, go do that. Issa, you're amazing. Any final words that you'd like to share with us about whatever, living well, healing, anything you would like to leave with the audience about this?
I would say, in all things, move toward peace. Whatever it is that's going to make you feel more peaceful, move toward it, and then you will automatically serve your best and highest potentials. I think that would be a message I would leave someone with, leave you with, leave your audience with.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. I've enjoyed it. I've had a smile on my face the whole time. That's a good sign. Really enjoyed it. I hope this is not the last conversation we have. Hope we
Oh,
do
thank
this
you.
again in some capacity. Really appreciate and value the work that you're doing in the world. So thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing in the world as well.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.